What's up, y'all? Deathload is here. I'm back with another Eversoul video. This time, I thought I'd make a guide for the Doomsday doll, Evil Soul Subjugation, featuring Jacqueline. This is actually the second time that we've gotten the Jacqueline Evil Soul Subjugation. I can only assume that this is going to be a reoccurring thing that's going to be happening with these Evil Soul Subjugations, considering that Vivian's Evil Soul Subjugation has also been announced to be returning. Now, an important note about this particular Soul Subjugation is that this is the very first Evil Soul Subjugation that was released, and it was the first one that introduced the groggy gauge to players. It was a lot of fun to figure out the mechanics behind this fight, and it was also a lot of fun trying to figure out what actually affects the groggy gauge. Another thing to note is that this Jacqueline has had some significant changes to her, mainly with her HP, damage, and some of her attacks have had their stats decreased, and also her permanent buffs have also been reduced. The max difficulty level has also been increased to 425 as opposed to 400. However, I won't be going that far for this guide. Now, upon looking at these changes, I thought to myself, like, oh, okay, so they're going to make it a little easier for new players to hopefully defeat level 301 difficulty Jacqueline. But upon testing this, I think the devs made a mistake. Now, I hope that this isn't what the devs were looking to do with Jacqueline, because if it is, then quite frankly, they undertuned her way too much. This version of Jacqueline compared to the last version of Jacqueline is a joke. And I don't mean to offend anyone if they're having difficulty on this fight, but compared to old Jacqueline, she was much more challenging. Well, I do feel that old Jacqueline did need to get nerfed a bit. I don't think she needed to get nerfed to this extreme. It took me 6 parties to defeat level 301 difficulty Jacqueline the first time around. With present day Jacqueline, it took me 2 parties to defeat her. And as you can see, I actually brought my soul levels down to level 240 to give a sort of fair comparison. And well, you can see for yourself the results are quite hilarious. Now, on the flip side, there was actually a good change, which is that Jacqueline's groggy gauge can now be affected by sleeps, charms, and silences, just like Ayame and Ira's Evil Soul Subjugation, making it much easier to slot in other souls and benefit from it. The other change that Jacqueline received from the previous Jacqueline is that when Jacqueline recovers from the groggy state, where she is stunned and exposed, prior Jacqueline would teleport to the furthest soul, knock them back, and repeat her pattern 1 and pattern 2 series of attacks. But now, Jacqueline just continues from where she left off at, making it much easier to understand what's actually going on in the fight. So, enough of that. This guide is going to be of the level 301 difficulty level, so that way you can try your chance at getting that sweet achievement skin that's unlocked when you defeat level 301 difficulty. So let's get to learn about the skills that the Doomsday doll Jacqueline uses. By the way, a side note, this OST is killer. We're going to start by talking about Evil Soul Jacqueline's main ability, RMRF. This attack deals a ton of damage to the nearest enemy and anyone around a 3-meter range around that soul. At level 301, it deals an additional 600% attack to the main target that Jacqueline is focusing on. Now on to Jacqueline's sub-ability 1, which is called Null Pointer Exception. Jacqueline targets the furthest enemy and attacks them with a 3-hit combo, then launches that target in the air. She then completes this with a finisher that attacks all enemies within a 3-meter range and knocks them back. Now, an important thing to note about this is it doesn't say this in the tooltip, but Jacqueline actually does this teleport repeatedly, choosing the furthest enemy, hitting each target with the 3-hit combo, and she does this 2 to 3 times, depending, of course, on her skill rotation. The next sub-ability is called 1011100111001100. Jacqueline summons thorns to the ground. She does AoE damage to all enemies. She also applies a bleed to all targets that deals 60% of attack every 2 seconds for 8 seconds. This can be stacked up to 3 times and can be cleansed. Jacqueline's sub-ability 3 is called 404 Not Found. This sub-ability basically beefs up Jacqueline's normal attacks to do shared damage to any souls near the target that Jacqueline is attacking, meaning that this damage can be split between souls to lower the damage. If there is no ally within 2 meters of that target, she deals double the damage to that soul. Jacqueline's final sub-ability, which I will call sub-ability 4 because I refuse to say that long letters and numbers sequence. Jacqueline deals damage to all enemies within a 4-meter range around her, blowing them all back, not blowing them all, because that's pretty sus translation there, devs. Anyways, after Jacqueline buffs herself with a permanent speed and attack boost that stacks anytime Jacqueline uses sub-ability 4. Now the thing that's got me scratching my head is that prior to Jacqueline using sub-ability 4, she teleports to the target furthest away and knocks everyone back within the vicinity of her. Then she proceeds to use her sub-ability 4 and knocks everyone back another time. And the thing that's got me scratching my head is whether this is part of sub-ability 4 or if it's part of sub-ability 1, her finisher, that also knocks people back. So if you guys have any idea what's going on here, please let me know in the comment section down below. But as of now, the only thing I can assume is that she's using her sub-ability 4 and she's knocking people back twice when she does this. Now that we've learned what Evil Soul Jacqueline does, we can now get into the tips and tricks that could potentially help your party formation out. First thing to note is that Jacqueline can actually be taunted in this fight, forcing her to teleport to the target that taunted her. This bypasses sub-ability 1 and sub-ability 4, which would have targeted the soul furthest away. The souls that have a taunt are Chloe, Lindsay, Suni, and Petra. The other tip would be that you want to have at least one support soul that cleanses the bleed stacks. At 3 stacks, this obviously does a lot of damage and needs to be cleansed. With some party formations, you can actually get away with having 1 stack of bleed, but you definitely want to cleanse it at 2 or more. The final tip has to do with the groggy gauge mechanic. As you can see, at the top left of Jacqueline's HP bar is a special blue bar. Basically what this does is whenever your souls do a stun, this groggy gauge bar is depleted, and as it hits 0%, she goes into this sort of stunned and exposed state where she takes an additional 100% damage from all attacks. Also, your main abilities will be refreshed, and so will your ultimate power. It's important to use up all your main abilities and your ultimate before she hits this groggy state. So that way you can take advantage of using main abilities and another ultimate when she enters the groggy state. Now, an important thing to note before we get into her skill rotation: anytime Jacqueline accumulates 100% mana, she will use her main ability after an animation of one of her sub-abilities or normal attacks. Let's take, for example, Jacqueline were to use her sub-ability 1, and she was supposed to teleport behind 3 targets that are furthest away and then do her finisher. During that time, Jacqueline accumulated 100% mana during her first teleport that did the 3-hit combo and knocked the soul up in the air. Well, her follow-up attack would not be the second teleport that she was supposed to do. It would actually be her main attack on the nearest enemy. After she does this main attack, she will then continue her skill rotation, doing her second teleport, followed by the third teleport. So basically, the skill rotation is put on pause at the moment that she gets 100% mana. Then soon after her main attack, she continues with the skill rotation. So let's move on to the skill rotation so that way you guys can see firsthand at what's actually happening during a fight, and I can explain myself while the fight is progressing. Jacqueline has 2 patterns of attacks, which I will be mentioning, and she has up to 3 skill rotations, meaning that each rotation has pattern 1 and pattern 2. Now for the purposes of illustrating the fight, I've brought my soul levels down to level 240. The team formation that I'm also using is not an optimal team formation for this fight and is only meant to showcase the skill rotation of Jacqueline. The other thing is, I won't be using too many skills, mainly my supportive skills, as to not bog down the fight with skill animations. So without further ado, let's continue showcasing the skill rotations. Jacqueline begins by using sub-ability 4, which grants her the attack and speed buff, while pushing any allies within 4 meters of her away. She then uses sub-ability 1, and this is where I had said that there's no mention of her teleporting to multiple targets during this. And on this first pattern, Jacqueline teleports 4 times. The first 3 times, she does her 3-hit combo, and her final teleport would be her finisher, where she knocks back any enemy soul within 3 meters of her. Also keep in mind that taunts do work to counteract this teleporting to the furthest enemy. Jacqueline then applies the sub-ability 2 bleed and deals damage to all souls. She then focuses the nearest soul and does 3 normal attacks. Keep in mind that these normal attacks can have their damage split, or you can have a tank take all the damage. But also keep in mind that if there is no ally within 2 meters of the ally that Jacqueline is targeting, she will deal double the damage to that soul. After the 3 normal attacks, Jacqueline does her sub-ability 2 twice, dealing AoE damage to all souls and applying a bleed stack per attack. After this, Jacqueline does 2 normal attacks, which concludes her first attack pattern. Following the 2 normal attacks, Jacqueline will do her sub-ability 1 this time, teleporting 3 times behind the furthest soul. The first 2 teleports are the 3-hit combos that knock souls up in the air, and the final teleport is her finisher, which knocks everyone back within 4 meters of her. Jacqueline then does sub-ability 2, dealing AoE damage and applying bleed. She follows this up with a normal attack, followed by a sub-ability 2, followed by a normal attack, and she then does sub-ability 2 one more time. She will then do 4 normal attacks. And following this, she finishes off by doing sub-ability 4. I had mentioned earlier that sub-ability 4 has an extra attack that actually part of sub-ability 4, or if it's part of sub-ability 1's finisher attack. But basically, Jacqueline teleports to the furthest enemy away and pushes anyone back within 4 meters of her. She then does sub-ability 4's described pushback and damage to any soul within 4 meters of her, while also granting herself an additional speed and attack buff. Keep in mind that this does stack anytime Jacqueline uses sub-ability 4. And this concludes skill rotation 1. So from this point on, her attack pattern repeats itself, going back to pattern 1, followed by pattern 2, then concluding skill rotation 2, and then moving on to skill rotation 3. Now as far as I know, I think the maximum that I've ever seen was 3 skill rotations, so this basically concludes the fight. Now just keep in mind what I said earlier about her main ability, and when she accumulates 100% mana, she will squeeze this attack within her attack pattern. So just keep that in mind when you're formulating your party and positioning them. Now I'm going to share with you my party formation that I used to defeat Jacqueline. I wish I could include footage of the fight that I had done against Jacqueline. However, the video would be too long. So I plan on uploading a separate video showcasing that fight at a later date. So these are the party formations that I used. First 4 are my top picks. At these levels, I was actually able to defeat Jacqueline twice with only 2 parties, which is what I was saying earlier. I feel like they undertuned her or nerfed her way too much. So have no fear. I believe that many of you guys will be able to defeat Jacqueline once you figure out her mechanics and what to look out for. So hopefully these first 4 party formations will help someone out. This first party consists of Chloe basically taunting Jacqueline for most of the encounter. I've noticed that she sometimes misses her taunt, or the taunt expires in some parts, but for the most part Chloe just keeps the attention. Then there's Renee with her stun and her mana drain, Talia providing the heals, cleanse, and mana battery, Vivian of course providing the speed and damage, and then there's Naomi providing more damage. Naomi is no soul to scoff at. she actually does a ton of damage with her sub-abilities over time. It's best to hold on to Naomi's ultimate until towards the end when she gathers 5 stacks of Fever Time, so that way she can dish out a ton of damage. This undead party is the traditional Dot team that's going to provide Violet with a lot of support, while Violet ramps up her damage over time. Petra will provide a taunt at all times. Meanwhile, Nini and Arusha will be providing the crowd control via the stuns and silences to break Jacqueline's groggy gauge. And then of course there's Prim, providing the heals, cleanse, and buffs. This third team formation's a bit of an odd one, but it actually works out. Basically has Lindsay being the main target of this fight. Keep in mind that to continue taunting Jacqueline, she needs to do an attack on her by a normal attack, a sub-ability, or a main or an ultimate. Meanwhile, the rest of the party is going to be supporting Aki's damage via crit damage increase, debuffs, and physical resist downs on Jacqueline. Now, Jiho does struggle a bit to heal everyone initially, but if you use her ultimate early to bring back all your allies' souls HP, I found out that after this, she tends to do a bit better in healing everyone. This final team formation has practically everyone aiding Liz a lot in her damage. Now the important thing to note here is that Suni's taunt comes from her main ability, so at the start of the battle, Jacqueline will be zipping around, damaging everyone. But after this, you need to pay attention to when Jacqueline is about to use her sub-ability 4 or sub-ability 1 and use Suni's main attack to grab her attention. And everyone else is going to be providing the stuns and the buffs that's needed for Lizelot's damage. And Clara, with her new artifact, will provide the cleanse. Those are my top 4 team formations. These final 3 are decent team formations, but they do tend to struggle a bit. Team formation 5 here mainly has your souls trying to dwindle down Jacqueline's groggy gauge to set up for the final 2 team formations. But just understand that at this point, you've exhausted most of your souls. So these next team formations, they're the final push to try to defeat Jacqueline. Well, alright, that's it. I hope that this guide has helped you out in understanding Jacqueline. Hopefully my team formations can help you in defeat level 301 Jacqueline. I tried really hard to get this guide out as soon as possible, but I want people to understand that I do have a full-time job and other obligations at home. And with these Evil Soul Subjugations only lasting 1 week, it doesn't really give me too much time. Anyways, hit that like button if you think that this guide helped you out. Subscribe, and comment down below on your thoughts on either Jacqueline's nerf or your party formation that you use to defeat Jacqueline. And if you like, you can check my channel out for other Eversoul related content. I thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye bye!